Welcome to Counsel Culture, the Business of Law podcast brought to you by Byfield.
Morning, Ben. We are recording on Friday morning. We've had some technical issues this week. How are you?
I'm good. That's right. We have had some technical issues. We attempted to record this yesterday, but we couldn't quite get the kit working. So we are trying to do this remotely, recording on Teams, which has worked quite well before. So I'm optimistic we won't sound too muddy and definitely not muddled. But it's almost quite good with doing this on Friday morning, isn't it? Because, yet another, I think it's the fifth executive order, came down very late yesterday on WilmerHale, and it's going to be the obvious place to start, isn't it?
Exactly. I mean, from the beginning of the week with discussion of Paul Weiss's reaction, Brad Karp's reaction to Trump's executive order, and now we're here. There's a lot to discuss this week. Again, I feel like the podcasts are almost writing themselves at this point. There's so much to discuss. So I guess we can take it back to the very beginning with Paul Weiss and Brad Karp's reaction. What are your thoughts about that? And what are your thoughts to the industry's different reactions and quite polarized reactions?
Yeah, it is very polarized, isn't it? I've got a lot of sympathy with Paul Weiss. At the end of the day, they're a law firm and a business, and you've got to put the survival first, and they've done that. And I think there's no doubt about it. I mean, let's just cut straight to the chase that the Trump administration, and Steve Bannon has come out and said this, they want at least one law firm to go under. And they want to do that because they want to show big law that they cannot challenge the Republican agenda. And Trump is they've pretty much come out and say that. Well, Steve Bannon did. So I think Paul Weiss knew that probably, there is the ambition that at least one big, almost household name in our world is going to go down, and they didn't want to be that firm. So I have got some sympathy with that. I'm pretty sure that statement or the email was written in expectation that it would leak, because these things always do. It was. Yeah, I mean, he had to obviously say something. The bit that I think is particularly interesting is the section where he almost warns off other firms from attempting to steal Paul Weiss's clients and B their staff, whilst calling out the profession for not coming to their aid, which obviously is the punchy bit, right?
Yeah.
And there are two ways of looking at that, aren't there? Is he sending a message to other firms, or is he sending a message to his own people that do not try and leave us now, because the reputational hit to the firms that you are going to will be significant? And I think that's the interesting bit. There's been a lot of noise, hasn't there? Mm-hmm. And we were looking at some articles which we'll touch on in a second. Around what firms should be doing in support of the industry, and there was my favourite piece I've read actually in the last week, and I do urge everyone to look at it. And I think it came out last Friday. Was Roland Friday wrote a very good, I thought, editorial, which wasn't even in the main news bit. It was in the analysis section, and I don't think even anyone had commented on it when I read it. But it's definitely the best bit of analysis I've read either side of the Atlantic over the last couple of weeks, where I don't necessarily fully agree with this, but I take the point that, what Trump is doing is he's shining a light on big law. And what big law does is make money for itself and make money for its clients. That's what it's there to do at the end of the day. And if you are, a partner or an associate and you're working for a big firm, you have to accept that. And as somebody once said to me, you don't work for a law firm thinking you're going to Greenpeace expecting a Goldman Sachs salary. That's unrealistic. Which someone said that to me years ago, and it always made me chuckle. And I think that Roland Friday editorial is absolutely essential reading. And to stress, I don't necessarily agree with it, but I think it makes a pretty valid point, because there's been a lot of hand-wringing, hasn't there, both by Paul Weiss, by obviously the Skadden associate, and that group of associates which seem to be mobilising across firms. And I think we are almost heading for a culture war. To coin a modern phrase in big law, where you've got the idealists versus the realists, and hopefully no surrealists, but definitely idealists versus realists, and that's how it's going to play out.
Exactly. Well, I mean, just to add to that here, I've got a really good sort of little snippet from the Roll on Friday article, which says dignified silence was deemed expedient until it wasn't. Offering statements on every passing political matter was expedient until it wasn't, and kissing Donald's ring will be expedient until it isn't. Which I think is a good, quite punchy, but I think that's what we've seen with Brad Karp in terms of kissing Donald's ring. I think this was a little message in terms of bringing a leader to their knees a little bit, which I think is Donald's aim. I think he wants to exert that power over the legal industry. What do you think of that little statement there?
Punchy. I'm going to slightly swerve the terminology in it, but I do agree. It's somebody. We had a really good session at Byfield in the week where we had some very senior communications and BD professionals from the biggest US firms based here, where we dedicated an hour just talking about this issue, and we're all comms people, but we weren't really talking about communications. We will get to that, I think, in a bit, but actually just talking about some of the politics and the mood music. And somebody made the very valid point that in America, money is power, but I think what we're seeing now is that power is power. And Trump obviously got money, and Trump and Bannon are exercising that power over big law, and it's I think it's actually quite scary, actually, what's happened. And we spoke about that when I was a guest last time. It's eye-wateringly quick how fast all this is moving, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And I think, obviously, as we've repeated before on previous episodes, this sort of rule of law bringing into question, but I do think it's worth mentioning, Donald Trump is kind of saying that these law firms have kind of went against the law. It's he's doing it in the name of justice, etc. But we're also seeing in parallel Trump pardoning certain people that are maybe of a higher standing, etc. So it's such a confusing time, I think, for law firms, the legality of it all. It's so confusing. It is really arbitrary. And I don't think we know what is going to come next. I think we've established a pattern so far in terms of he's not giving up. But I don't know what the end goal is. And I think, as you say, in terms of retaliation, in terms of the legal industry's retaliation, we have seen a Skadden associate who has protested and given their resignation to kind of say, I'm not standing for this, and we need to rise up against it. She wrote a letter, and many of her peers and people that were above her, partners, didn't respond. And as a reaction, she said, I'll hand in my resignation. So what's your sort of view on this quite strong stance?
Well, it's my realism versus idealism thing, isn't it? Yeah. And, I think we talk about this quite a lot, don't we? But, when I reflect on COVID and the George Floyd tragedy, that really was the first point where it was very, very clear to firm. It was very, very clear that the almost the moral voice of law firms was being driven by its associate base. Not saying that business services are not part of that as well, but you felt that for the first time associates started to mobilise and put pressure on their firms to have views on things. But these are up to now, these have all been political, societal issues, including the invasion of Ukraine, the tragic events in Gaza. But the first time, this is around the profession in and of itself. And I think it will be very interesting to see if law firm management listen to their associate base in the same way that they did during those social political things, because now It's the business itself which is potentially at stake, isn't it? And I think this is going to be a super interesting time, whether idealism or realism will win out. At the end of the day, law firms are going to have to bend at least a little bit to Trump. This ends two ways, Olivia, as far as I can see it. Either one or two very big law firms go down, and as we all know, it doesn't take law firms are fragile places in some respects in terms of the way that they're, financially structured. You only have to remember when Dewey Ballantyne and others went down. It sometimes doesn't take too long once clients and people start to leave. So I think that's the aim. The other thing, which I hope and sort of expect is a little bit more likely, is that Trump gets bored. I think you only have to look at the press coverage. Obviously, Paul Weiss, Perkins Coie before that. I would say this week, the coverage around Jenner and Block and even WilmerHale today, just to stress we're recording this on Friday morning, live into your living rooms. It's just a bit less, isn't it? The impact of each executive order will become less and less and less. And he might get bored and feel it's run its course and turn his attention elsewhere and feel that he now has big law to heal. So in many respects, Paul Weiss, by not fighting, may have done the industry a bit of a favour, in as much as Trump is going to think, well, this is working, let's just do a couple more of these and then just focus on accountants or whatever else.
Move on to the next professional service. Well, I mean, that's the thing, and hopefully he does get bored. As we keep saying, what is the end goal? Where does it all go? We're going in circles here. I do think there's something to be said, as you say, for at the end of the day, America's a capitalist country. People have got to make money. Paul Weiss has got to kind of it had to do something, and I do have, as you say, I feel sympathy as well for what Brad Karp had to do. So, yeah, I mean, do you have anything else to add to that situation at all? Do you have any sort of forecast, any PR tips? If this was your law firm that was going through this, what would you advise?
Yeah, well, we talked about it in the week with the session that I mentioned a few minutes ago. Two massive cliches, right? One, this is an unpredictable moving situation. Two, it's unprecedented. So what you haven't got is a playbook. What we always try and do in communications is stakeholder management and scenario planning. You kind of work through the various eventualities of what may happen next, and then you plan for them in terms of what you're going to say, so that you're not caught on the hoof and you're not drafting on the hoof, and you've got a playbook and you're ready to go. That's just good practice. Pretty much all our listeners will be nodding sagely in agreement. But what do you do with this? It's really very difficult. It's very difficult to scenario plan for scenarios you can't really envisage. I do probably get the sense, I don't pretend to be on the inside of Washington, that any firms who are at risk of an executive order probably know about it.
Yeah. Well,
I think there was a big difference between having an executive order against you and being on that list of whatever it was, 20 firms, which came out last week. There's a big difference between those two things. And I would have thought that most firms that, I don't think an executive order now is going to catch anyone by surprise, and they'll be preparing for it. And it's binary, isn't it? You fight it or you do a Paul Weiss.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I think Elon Musk actually tweeted last Sunday about the next firm that they wanted to target. And then we had the associate that's kind of stood out from that firm. So that's a bit of a PR crisis, right? In terms of, the associate standing out. You've got Elon Musk tweeting, "You're next." Internally, what is going on there? I know it's hard to kind of imagine, but getting inside your head, how would you?
It's not. And I refer back to the Roll on Friday piece, where Trump is shining a light on big law, and there are cultural wars now taking place inside law firms, I think, between associates wanting their firms to stand for something, and frankly things that those firms have been saying they've stood for some time, and then people that own the business who've got to keep it going. Who know that those values that the associates are pushing hard might, this is terribly dramatic, but if those values are stood by firm and firmly, you might be in some real trouble from the government and financially, with clients leaving, people leaving. Really hard. I wouldn't want to be in that position as a law firm leader now. That's for sure.
Or head of comms. That is it's a hard.
I wouldn't mind being I wouldn't mind being a head of communications, I have to say, in a firm working through this, because you never, although it's a bit grim, you're never really going to face anything quite as intense, I would have thought, again in your career. So if you are a head of comms in one of these firms, I'm sure you're not enjoying it or embracing it, but I think you know that you're at the pinnacle of your career. I think handling this, and that's no exaggeration.
Completely agree with you there. Yeah, I guess, in a few years' time you can maybe look back, but for now it's we do sympathise. Now moving along a little bit to across the pond, Linklaters has promoted 16 lawyers in the city. This is a 23% increase from last year. Let's discuss that a little bit, Ben. Let's discuss the sort of areas that this has happened in, the practice areas this has happened in, etc.
Yeah. Look, so in amongst all the, terribly serious stuff this week, I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about the promotion rounds of Links and Slaughters, because I think they are really, really, really significant. So Link, I've got the numbers here. So Links, have promoted 16 in London, which is not quite a record, but it's pretty decent, up from last year. I think it's something like 20%, even a little bit more higher. And one of the things I think is super encouraging is, I'm not going to bore everyone listing all the practice areas, but the majority of them look to be transactional lawyers. And if, a Magic Circle firm is having a very healthy London promotion round, and the majority of those lawyers are transactional lawyers as opposed to disputes, that's great, right? It signifies that, all is not lost, and, perhaps there are deals out there, and, perhaps the Magic Circle and the UK headquartered firms are doing okay. And Slaughters promoted 5 this year, which, to those that are not particularly close to Slaughters, will think isn't that much, but it's not too bad at all, considering the relatively small size of the partnership. And I think the majority of those were transactional as well. So, but I think in a normal news week, in normal times, and we don't know when those will come back, there would have been some analysis on this, and there would have been, despite the economic headwinds, some quite encouraging, noises around the fact that those two firms, the Magic Circle is certainly being seen to be under some pressure, both individually and collectively as a part of the sector. These things are quite encouraging. I was quite happy to see that, but obviously and completely understandably, the coverage in law.com and the lawyer was, pretty factual. Just bash out a quick news piece and then go back to the turmoil that's going on. And I'd like to take a little step backward and think, actually, do you know what? Maybe everything might be all right. But we do move on, and we have to go back and think, well, I think the big question that we'll need to tackle going forward is, obviously the US firms are now in the eye of the storm of all this. What does it mean for UK firms? And that is the big question, I think, which the spring and the early summer will tell us. And I don't think we quite know yet. Are the UK headquartered firms, insulated? Can they carry on as they were before, or will some adaptation take place? And I think it's linked to the political climate here with reform. If reform, continue to make strides and just grow, are we going to be seeing? And this is not a party political, sorry, that's not the right word. This isn't a political podcast. There's enough of those out there. But I do think the two things are quite linked. And will the UK, I think the future of those types of firms here is linked to the kind of political climate here, which obviously still feels pretty liberal.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, that's a good point. And it's as you say, it's definitely going to be linked, but we don't know how yet. And I think just to go back to sort of the promotions, as you say, and that sort of positive news in it all is just completely been swept to the side, which is a bit unfortunate. But then again, it shows in a sort of indicator in terms of the market and the deals that are out there. So maybe on the UK front, there is a little bit of positivity there that we can maybe sort of round up the podcast with. I'm looking at the names here as well of the people that were promoted, and we've got about, a third female, it seems to be, or women. So that's really positive as well. We love to see that. So yeah, I mean, let's take the positive out of it all, because right now it's a bit bleak in the legal industry.
It is, and I think you raise a valid point there at the end. Is law firms have quite correctly long had gender and ethnicity targets at partnership level, and under the current, unless I'm wrong, the current regime would see that as discriminatory against middle-aged white blokes. Let's face it. And I really hope that firms are not having to throw those targets and ambitions into the bin. And I said this last time I was on. I think it's a good note to end on, really. Law firms are not terribly diverse places, are they? But they want to be, and they really make great strides to try to be. And I just desperately hope that those efforts are not in vain at all.
No, and especially for one man, which hopefully we can get some sort of rally. Because the efforts to be squandered would be very sad indeed. But yes, as we say, a positive note to end on slightly, and hopefully we can see that reflected in more law firm promotions soon. But yes, I mean, we don't know what next week will bring, what the weekend will bring. As we say, we're coming live and direct on Friday morning, so goodness knows. But yes, I mean, thank you very much, Ben, for joining me this week.
Cheers,
Another
Olivia.
great conversation. And I'll see you next week.
See you soon.
You've been listening to Counsel Culture, the Business of Law podcast brought to you by Byfield. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and join us again next week, where we'll be discussing some more of the biggest stories in the legal sector.